What is up, guys? It's your buddy Blue Spooky here with another daily video. Your standard 1 hour and 30-minute affair. If you guys end up enjoying this video, please be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe if you feel so inclined. If you have any thoughts about the stories in this video, please be sure to leave them in the comments below, as one of my favorite things about doing these videos is reading your guys' comments, even if I can't always respond to them. Last but not least, if you'd like to go that extra step and support the channel even more than you do by just watching the video already, go ahead and click that join button next to the subscribe button. It's $2 a month at the lowest tier, and you get a special icon next to your name when you comment, and special emoticons that you can use when you comment as well. No content will be locked behind the paywall, of course. It's simply something extra you can do if you'd like to support the channel a little more. Either way, I will get right into the video, and I hope you guys enjoy the true scary stories. Thanks for watching. Last year, I took a trip in my Nissan Altima from Prescott, Arizona to New Orleans. To make a long story short, my ex-girlfriend, who was a tattoo artist, was being sued by a guy she had once inked, apparently over an injury he had sustained during the session. She asked me to come as a witness on her behalf, as I had been there the night in question. The trip was scheduled to take me between 20 and 22 hours driving along Route 40 East. I popped in my headphones, tossed my bag in the front seat, and started driving before the newspapers had even been delivered. It should be noted that the Altima was a two-door coupe, and the only access to the back seat was by folding the two front seats forward. Rarely did I ever have more than one person in the car. I could hardly ever place anything in the back seat either, lest most of the time I completely forget it even existed. The first part of my trip went smoothly. Traffic was alright, the weather was fine as well, and my playlist was keeping me entertained. Yes, I know it might seem a bit strange that I listen to my music through headphones while driving, instead of using the radio, but that's just how I chose to relax. My first pit stop was in New Mexico, where I refueled and grabbed a bite to eat. Afterwards, I got back in my car, popped my headphones back in, and continued on my way east. Upon returning to the car, though, I noticed a stale taste in the air, but I dismissed it as a lingering scent from the restaurant. I'd driven for maybe another hour or so when I decided to pull over on the side of the road. I had to make a quick phone call, and I had to take a piss anyway by that point too. I was in Texas now, on a long stretch of highway that was pretty much desert in every direction. I stepped out of the car and stretched my legs. I took a discreet leak behind a bush, then called my ex to make her aware of my progress on my journey. I also dropped a quick voicemail to my boss. Keep in mind this whole time, I was pacing along the side of the road. Ultimately, though, I was still facing my car. There was no one around, and even though every half minute or so, another car would pass by, nobody stopped for any reason before I got back into my car. I put my earbuds back in and closed the driver's side door. I started my car and fired up the AC. I was just shifting the car into drive when I heard my passenger door slam shut. My heart leapt into my throat, and I tore my earbuds out immediately. I looked over to my right. The front seat was pushed forward, and out of the corner of my eye, I noticed someone walking away from my car. I yelled out, "What the hell?" I spun around in my seat, immediately power locking all my doors. The person walking away from my vehicle was a short, disheveled man with thinning hair, a jeans jacket, and no shirt on underneath, maybe about 50 years old or so. I watched him in my rearview mirror, staggering around like he was drunk. He walked right into the middle of the road, where he stopped, bent over, then vomited all over the pavement. That's when I noticed he was wearing corduroy pants and blue Crocs. He wiped his mouth and turned to look at me. His mouth was kind of lopsided, and he was missing a few teeth as well. I could hear him trying to say something to me, but I could barely make it out from inside the car. I dialed 911 and gave the operator an estimate of where this guy was and that he tried to get into my car. I watched as the guy began to wander off into the desert, hanging off the belt on his back. I noticed one of those leather pouches employees keep utility knives in. I told the operator he had a knife and drove off swiftly after. Whatever was going on here, I didn't really want to get involved and get potentially stabbed. I was so shaken up by this that I didn't stop again until I was running on fumes, playing in my head over and over again about how that guy had gotten so close to my car without me noticing. Where had he even come from? The next time I stopped for gas was when it finally hit me. I didn't smoke, but there was an empty cigarette pack in my back seat. That's why the stale taste had been in the air. He had been lying in my back seat ever since I left New Mexico, and I hadn't even noticed. When the door slammed, he had not been trying to get in. He had been getting out. I had been listening to my earbuds the entire time, and I hadn't heard or noticed anything because of this. He could have stabbed me at any point, and I would have never seen it coming. I'm not sure what was wrong with him for him to be staggering about like that, but whatever happened, thank goodness he didn't decide to hurt me, and that he simply got out of my car instead. I'm glad I also didn't end up transporting him all the way to my destination. I never found out what happened to him, or what he wanted. I never tell this story to anyone, because most people find it very hard to believe. They assume I'm just messing with them, and truly, I wish that I was. I haven't listened to my earbuds in the car since then. I went on a date with a guy from Craigslist. I was 17 years old at the time. I put up an ad looking to meet someone. I don't remember the exact details. A guy responded who lived close to me, and so I emailed him back and gave him my number. He was actually one of the only ones who responded without a creepy message. He said his name was John and that he was 26 years old. This guy John and I spoke for 2 days before meeting. We met on a Friday night. We texted back and forth and he asked if I was single. I said yes, and he asked what kind of food I like to eat because he wanted to take me to a restaurant. I asked him a few questions about himself, and he told me he still lived with his mother but had the top floor all to himself. He was a part-time model, and that made some pretty good money. Judging by his picture, him being a model was a fairly believable story. Friday night comes and John comes to pick me up. He drove a silver 2-door car. He texted me and said he was waiting outside. After checking my hair and makeup one last time, I said goodbye to my parents, telling them I was heading out with friends. Then I left and got into John's car. The first thing I noticed was that he actually looked exactly like his photo. He had pale skin with dark hair and dark eyes. He looked a little bit older in person, but not that much, and he made up for it with snappy fashion sense. Actually, he looked kind of cool, and he was incredibly kind as well. His body language and smile totally put me at ease. Yes, it's really stupid to go on a date you met on Craigslist, but surprisingly, this guy was really normal. We chatted for a while as he started driving away from my hometown towards the highway. He wanted to drive us into the city to go to dinner, which wasn't too far away, only around a 25-minute journey. John started to reveal more details about himself to me on this journey. He told me he was embarrassed to tell me he lived with his mother, that I might think bad of him for not having his own place at his age. John got closer and closer to the highway. I can't tell you exactly what it was. I won't make it up because I don't exactly remember. There wasn't anything creepy going on either. I just suddenly felt put off by him. You know when you're on a date with someone and you're not quite sure, and then they tell you something that's your biggest turnoff? It was that kind of situation. Again, he didn't say anything too creepy, just was very off-putting. As we're getting closer and closer to the turnoff, I tell this perfectly nice guy that I'm really sorry, but I don't feel like going to dinner anymore. I'm not feeling very well. John's initial reaction was one of sympathy. "What's wrong? Are you okay? Am I driving badly?" I told him I just didn't feel well. Well, John then kept asking me, "What did I say? What did I do?" I told him it's not him, it's me. I wanted to go home because I really felt ill. "Okay, well, let me just drive you around for a bit before I take you back. I don't want to end the evening just like this." I knew without him driving me home, I'd have to walk over an hour, maybe more, so I told him that driving around for a second seemed like a fine idea. Instead of him turning around and heading back towards my house, though, he veered off and started heading to the town I knew he lived in. I should mention it was pitch black out, and the town where John lived was surrounded by dense woods. This wasn't even worth mentioning if you took the highway and the proper turnoffs to get there, but instead he decided he wanted to go via the back roads because it was more scenic, despite the fact I couldn't see a thing. John had gone from being incredibly talkative to almost completely silent now. He kept driving further into the wooded area. A few times I'd ask him questions about himself to break the awkward silence. At one point, I even put my hand down on his knee affectionately, trying to regain the friendly, flirty banter we'd had just moments before he blanked me. For the most part, he occasionally answered with soft grunts or nods. It was like he was having a tantrum or something. John pulled into the parking lot for the forest. It was around 9 p.m., so naturally it was totally empty. He slowly drifted along, looking around for other cars, then parked the car right at the end closest to the woods. There was no one else around. I hadn't even seen anyone pass us. No other cars on the way to get there. For 10 minutes he just sat there, staring into the darkness ahead. It was disturbing. I think I managed to make small talk for about 5 minutes, which is a long time when someone isn't saying anything back. I then joined him in his silence. I was afraid of appearing fake. I didn't want him to think I was scared. So some time of silence goes by, when abruptly John gets out of the car, closes the door, and locks it. I was stuck inside. His lights were on, so I could sort of see ahead in front of the car. There was a field that went on for about 20 feet. Then beyond that were trees and dense forests. To the left was the rest of the car park and the exit at the far end. To the immediate right was some more forest, with a small path. John disappeared into the area ahead. I tried the handle on the door, but it wouldn't open. I began to rationalize this away. Maybe he'd accidentally locked the door. I was telling myself that if he really wanted to do something, he would have stayed in the car. With no sign of John, I decided I needed to call someone. I looked around for my phone, only to find that I could no longer find it. This was an old silvery pay-as-you-go flip phone. I was confused that I couldn't find it, because I had put it right next to me. After looking for it for a good few minutes, it became sure that he had taken it with him. Mind you, I didn't want to start rooting around his car in case he might be watching me. I didn't want him to catch on that I was freaking out. At that point, I started looking for my phone with only my eyes, instead of making it obvious that I was petrified. My eyes were darting all around. There was nothing there. I looked up and squinted into the field and forest ahead. I saw John. He was standing about 10 feet from the car in that small field. He was standing and smiling, but it wasn't a friendly smile. He looked terrifying. This was not the same guy I got into the car with earlier. I looked ahead and smiled back. I was still trying to act like his behavior was normal, like nothing he was doing was scary at all. Still smiling, his tongue began to protrude from his mouth. He stuck it all the way out, then began wagging his tongue up and down while maintaining eye contact with me. I felt myself trembling. I was trying to compose myself, not taking his eyes off me, and with his tongue still out, he started unzipping his pants and then began to urinate in front of me, all while staring me dead in the eyes. This is the point I found it difficult to act like I was in on his behavior. I looked down at the floor, not wanting to watch what was in front of me. He didn't creep or slink back to the car. Instead, I heard his thundering steps and then a slam against the window. I guess at this point, I was the luckiest person alive because another car pulled into the parking lot. I don't know what this did to John, but immediately he got back in and laughed at me. Normal laughs like earlier, like nothing had been wrong. "So what music do you like? I'll put it on while I drive you home." He did drive me all the way home. When he pulled up to my house, I went for the door, but it was still locked. "I want you to promise me something," he said. I asked him what it was. If you ever see me after this, turn the other way and act like you don't know me. If you see me with my family, don't you dare say a word. I don't expect to bump into you, but don't say anything." I agreed and then asked him, "Have you seen my phone?" He told me no. I guess my phone was a small sacrifice for surprisingly making it home okay. When I got inside my house, I said goodnight to my parents and went upstairs to my room. I then turned on my computer. I wanted to gather as much information about this guy as I could. Back then, I used MSN Messenger, like AOL Instant Messenger, and logged in automatically whenever I started my PC. Now before I get to the final part of this story, it's important that you know this. One day before, I had been at my best friend's house. We had the kind of friendship where it was like who could pick on the other the most. It was all in good fun, and mostly we just made minor fun of each other and had a big laugh. The day before, my friend had changed 2 contacts in my phone. She replaced the contact mom with the guy I had been texting back and forth with. I knew immediately she had done this because I saw the previous messages come up. I didn't change the numbers back at the time, thinking I would just do it later. When I logged into my MSN Messenger, I had a ton of messages from this guy and a few from my best friend. When John had locked me in the car, he had taken my phone and texted my mom, which was actually still this other guy. He had texted them, "I'm sorry, but I decided to move on. I found someone, so please don't look for me. I'm happy being left alone." The guy I was texting knew this was a big red flag. He responded and texted my phone back saying, "I don't think this is you. I know where you went, and I'm calling the police." Incredibly quick thinking from him. He had absolutely no idea where I was. I think his text saved my life that night, and it explains John's sudden change of behavior. Maybe it wasn't the random car that pulled into the parking lot. Maybe it really was that text. In 2009, I went on a trip to the Tiputini Research Facility in the rainforest of Ecuador as part of a tropical rainforest ecology course I took in university. We had been out on a hike all afternoon and were headed back to the station shortly after 1800. For those of you who don't know, on the equator the sun rises at 0600 and sets at 1800 pretty much every single day. It was quite dark now, and given the canopy cover, we were relying on our headlights and our guide to get back to the facility. As we were going along, I kept on hearing this strange noise coming from above us and slightly behind us. I wasn't too worried though, because there were lots of monkeys in the area. It was probably just observing us, and our guide didn't seem too concerned either. Once we got back to the camp though, I asked our guide privately about the noises. He explained to me that a jaguar had been waiting there for one of us to fall behind. He'd heard it too, but didn't start to freak out because then the group may have begun to panic as well, and that would have made things much worse. Needless to say, I stayed away from the tree line after dark after that. Jaguars aren't known to typically attack humans, but sometimes they do, and I wouldn't want to meet one in the dark in a heavily forested area, especially if I'd fallen behind. My husband and I went camping with some of our buddies. We sat around drinking until about 2-ish a.m. We were in northern Michigan, and we were at a campsite, but we were far from other campers. You would have to drive a car to get to our campsite, because we were way out there from everyone else. Anyways, we all get into our tents and pass out. Everyone else was asleep, but I woke up around 3-ish with a sudden urge to pee. I decided not to bring the lantern with me because I didn't want to wake everyone else up. I stumbled pretty far out and popped a squat. It was pitch black in the area I was. I couldn't even see my hand in front of my face because it was such a cloudy and dark night. As I was finishing up, I started to hear footfalls behind me, creeping up on me. I had my back towards the woods, but I could tell it did not sound like any animal I knew. I suddenly had this sick feeling in the pit of my stomach, and I booked it back into my tent to be with the company of the others. I then laid there quietly and listened to these footsteps follow me back and walk around our tent for quite a while. Then they just walked off into the night. I went to check when daylight broke, but I still have no idea what it was, nor did I want to find out that night. Recently, my dad and I were scouting a pretty remote old dirt road, which was pretty far away from any other campgrounds. People had made campsites little more than a clear patch on the thick forest floor really, a little ways off the road here and there. We found a few of them, one of which had cocaine and condoms strewn about it. We eventually found a nice one though, and decided since it was getting dark already, that we camped there for the night. After I set up my hammock, I decided to go and get some firewood. Eventually, I came upon a small clearing with a single dead tree in it. I started hacking off the branches with my knife. As I was chopping at the wood though, I started to hear footsteps out in the woods. It was way too quiet to be a bear or some other similar type of animal. I thought that maybe it was an elk or a wolf perhaps. I kept on hacking away. The thing is though, I started to notice I would only ever hear the footsteps while I was chopping, but as soon as I stopped, they would stop immediately. And that's when I said, man, screw this. I'll just take the wood I already have and start heading back. I began to hear more footsteps all around as I started my way back though. The forest was so thick that I couldn't see anything out there. If you've been to coastal BC, you'll know what I mean. I had left my machete in my hammock, and the walk back to camp with these footsteps following me was the most unnerving 15 minutes I'd had in a long time. We were far enough away from civilization that we couldn't head back right away either, so I had to sleep with my machete and my knife in either hand that night. Needless to say, it was a very restless sleep. At least I had enough firewood to cook a few bratwursts though. Eventually we made it back just fine, but I never figured out what those footsteps in the woods really were. My scariest experience was with lightning while hiking through the Colorado Trail in, you guessed it, Colorado. The trail was about 500 miles long through a range of terrain in the Rocky Mountains. I'm 99% certain I spotted and then lost sight of a mountain lion at some point, which was unnerving. Several times I was rather freaked out by some aggressive bulls when passing through herds of free-range cattle. That was scary too. But the scariest I have a good chance of dying here was being in wide open areas in the middle of an intense thunderstorm. The worst was on what I think was a snow mesa. The mesa is miles across at an elevation of around 12,000 feet, mostly flat and essentially treeless. As I was moving through, there were small scattered thunderstorms quickly developing as I was crossing the area, and as a result there was a lot of lightning. For those of you who don't know, in areas with a lot of valleys or high elevation, the weather is very unpredictable, and lightning strikes happen quite often. The trail across this area was 3 miles long, and there was nowhere to take cover. There were storms all around me, perhaps half a mile away or less, producing lightning strikes every few seconds. There were numerous storms like this, moving all around. It was so surreal. The part of the trail I was walking down could be in bright sunlight, while I watched storms move all around me just a short distance away. I had to slow down or speed up my pace to try and time my way through the paths of these storms. I ended up closer to the edge of some of them than I really wanted to be. There were some really close calls with the lightning strikes, close enough for my hair to get tingly, and for me to even smell some of it burning. It was scary being so exposed out there, being able to see tens of lightning strikes per minute around me. That was one of those I fucked up bad moments. A long moment that lasted 30 to 45 minutes until I finally emerged from that deadly area. So now that the case is over and I can talk about it freely, I figured I would share my story of the time I was abducted. This happened in 2021. I was 20 at the time and had just gotten off work around 11 p.m. I went straight home to get ready to go out and meet my friend at the strip club. He'd messaged me via Facebook Messenger to hang out and smoke, and I told him I was meeting someone else and didn't really want to hang out that night, so he offered to drive me to and from. Well, around 12:30, he arrived to pick me up and said he had to take out some garbage first. He had a couch on the back of the pickup truck bed, which I assume was the garbage he was talking about. He said he'd made us some margaritas as well, but I told him I didn't want to drink till I got to my destination. We ended up just smoking marijuana on the way to dump the couch instead. It was about a 25 to 30 minute car ride to where he wanted to dump this couch. By the time we'd made it to the destination, it was already 1:15 a.m. There was a logging road just off the side of the highway that went on for miles. He pulled all the way down to the end and left the couch there, then got back in the truck and started driving back towards the highway. Once we'd gotten about halfway back to the highway though, he stopped, put his truck in park, then pulled out a pipe and started smoking more marijuana. After taking a hit, he turned his head to me and stared at me for a full minute with this weird smirk on his face. All of a sudden, he almost looked like he wanted to jump at me, but stopped himself in the moment, with his hands in a motion as if he was about to grab me. I was getting scared at this point. I was frozen in shock, not knowing if he was just joking around or not. I quickly realized it was not a joke though. I opened my door like I was about to get out, and he did the same. I closed my door and he closed his too. We ended up doing this door tag back and forth until he eventually got tired of it and got out of the truck and ran to my side. He threw open my door and tried to pull me out by my legs. As I was trying to kick him, I pulled my phone out to call the police. Of course, my Face ID didn't want to work in that moment though, and he ended up smacking the phone right out of my hands. I kicked him hard enough in the chest that he flew backwards, falling onto his butt. I grabbed my purse and hopped out of the truck. I started running towards the highway. I kept looking back to see how far behind me he was. He gave me a bit of a head start before chasing after me, grabbing me by the back of my shoulders when he caught up, and forcibly throwing me into a ditch. I landed on my stomach, with one leg straight out and the other bent at a weird angle. He jumped on top of my legs and held my left hand behind my back. I screamed and begged him to bring me home, and said I wouldn't tell anyone. He got upset that I was screaming, and tried suffocating me with his other hand while holding my left behind my back. I kept trying to pull his hands off my face with my right hand. It was getting to the point where I couldn't really breathe. Finally, he let go of my face. I turned my head around to see what he was doing, and to my surprise, I watched him pull zip ties out of his front jeans pocket. He zip-tied my hands behind my back, and then tried to forcibly pull my garments off me. I had a skirt on and was laying on my stomach. I remember digging my knees into the ground so he couldn't do it. He got up and started pacing around after he failed. He started muttering to himself, "It shouldn't have to happen this way. Just do what I say." I cried, telling him that if he was going to do anything to me, then to put me back in the truck first. He did. I'm not going to go into too much detail about this part of the story, but I noticed as soon as we got back to the truck, he pulled out a small Ziploc baggie containing a single condom. I asked him what he was doing, and he said he was going to need protection. After all that went down, he got back in the truck. Mind you, I was still tied up. He drove back to the highway and just started driving around. I made up every excuse to get him to take these off me, but of course he would not. At one point, I asked for a cigarette. I don't even smoke. He lit one, smoked on it for a bit, then held it up to my mouth saying, "I'll hold it for you." At this point, I was just thinking, what can I do to get myself out of this situation? I really thought I was going to die. I started saying anything I could, like, "You can be my sugar daddy. I'll pay to take us out to dinner tomorrow. If sex is the only thing you wanted from me, you could have just said that." He loved it so much, he started saying he would even put me on his life insurance policy, so when he died, I could get the money. After soothing him like this for a while, I asked him again if he could take the zip ties off me now. He pulled to the side of the road and pulled out a mini pocket knife from his car keys. He then cut them off me. It took a few tries because of how tightly he'd bound me. He gave me my phone back as well. I had an Apple Watch on my wrist and asked him for it after noticing he'd snatched that in the struggle too. He had this surprised look on his face and said, "Well, we need to go back and get it." He turned around and started heading back to where all this had just happened at. I guess it had been dropped in the struggle. I got so scared. I thought to myself, after all that, this is it? I'm going to die here, and nobody will know until somebody finds my body. And once we got there, he told me to stay in the truck. He got out and searched the ditch for my watch. He came back after 5 minutes and said he couldn't find it, but he would go back in the morning to look when it was light outside. We got back to the highway and headed back to town. Once we got back to town, he asked me, "What do you want to do now?" Like nothing had ever happened. I said, "Bring me to my mom's house. I have work in 4 hours and I'm really tired." It was 4:30 a.m. by this time. He did bring me back to my mom's, thankfully. After getting to my mom's house, I looked up his name on Google. I didn't know it, but apparently he was on parole for first-degree murder. He had killed someone before for their life insurance policy. I'm 22 now, and I'm thankful I got to see another day. I had to testify against him, and he was found guilty November 6th of 2023 of all the charges he was accused of. As of now, he hasn't quite been sentenced yet, though. My family has a cabin in a remote area of the Rocky Mountains. There's this one particular hike nearby that we would always go on when I was growing up. It took you up a large hill, cut down into a ravine, and took you down to an abandoned mining cabin. It was really cool, and the cabin itself was full of old antiques, books, cans, furniture, you name it. Last summer, I took my SO on the hike to show off this cool abandoned cabin to them. It had been about 5 years since I'd last been there, and it took us quite a while to find the trailhead because it was so overgrown now. We hacked our way through brush, and luckily I had a really good memory for the general direction we should be going in. As we were heading down the ravine, we saw the roof of the old cabin. Excited that we'd found our way through all the brush, we started to head towards it. Once we went inside, though, it was completely different than the last time I'd been there. Instead of the cool old furniture and antiques, there was some sort of nest. The nest stretched from floor to ceiling and across 2 entire walls of the cabin. The most unsettling thing about it, though, was that the nest appeared to be made of bones. Not small bones either. There were big ones. One was the size of a human clavicle even. I immediately had this terrible feeling and wanted to get the fuck out as soon as possible. We booked it out of there and ran up the ravine as quickly as our dog could keep up with us. We reached the top in less than 30 minutes and were at the top of the hill where we could look down and see the cabin below. We stopped to catch our breath at the top, which was fairly flat and had a lot of visibility. I decided to use that moment to try and get a signal on the satellite phone from the high point. I got a hold of my mom, and we were having a quick chat. I kept on hearing this strange noise, though. It was off in the distance, and I couldn't quite make it out, but my SO was hearing it too, and getting increasingly uncomfortable. I could finally make out the noise eventually, and I realized that was because it was getting louder and closer. It appeared to be the sound of 2 metal objects being clanked together, like someone banging a spoon against a skillet or something. My dog started to get super defensive and started snarling and barking in the direction of where we'd just hiked out of. Now we were completely freaked out. I hung up the call, we grabbed our packs, and ran the rest of the 2 miles back to our cabin. We reported our experience and gave our photos of the cabin interior to a local forest service, who concluded that the nest was most likely a bear or cougar den. The noise we heard following us out of the ravine, though, will haunt my nightmares for years to come, especially because they concluded it was totally unrelated. Not sure if this counts as scary really, but I was a wildland firefighter in Yarnell. My crew was almost sent at around the same time as the 19 firefighters that died there, but we weren't sent until a few hours later. When we got there, that's when we learned that all those firefighters had passed away. That night, we were sleeping in the desert. Many of us don't like tents, so we just made do with tarp on the ground and slept on a bag on top of it. Anyway, I was awoken by a horrible wind. It was a very powerful one that blew sand and bugs against everything so hard that it actually hurt. I pulled the sleeping bag over my head to shut out the wind and sand. About half an hour later, there was a huge alarm and a lot of people running this way and that. I popped out and saw everybody was piling into the vehicle. Knowing that the fire wasn't far away and the wind was crazy, I took no chances. I rushed into the vehicle, and we all left right then and there. As I turned to look back at where we had just been, I could see the fire was already not too far away from where we were. And within just a few moments, it was fully caught ablaze. That was not a pleasant night. Another time, we were working very deep in a forest, where you literally wonder if you're the first human in the area. We were on night shift, and were supposed to stand apart by 50 yards and watch the fire in the distance. By that time, I was quite used to being in dark forests. I had become comfortable with it because I knew there was nothing nearby that would be a threat to me. So when I saw something moving in the dark about 20 feet away, I didn't really think that much of it. I was eager to see what animal this was, though. I turned my light on, and the first thing I saw was an upside-down triangular face and massive ears with huge glowing eyes. The face looked rather gray due to the light and ashes. This all happened within a span of 5 seconds, but to me it felt like forever. For a moment, my heart nearly stopped, as I thought I was seeing a goblin or something. I kept telling myself, no, you aren't crazy. This isn't a goblin. That's not what you're looking at. Just as I was about to try and decide whether to scream for the nearest guys to come help me, I saw the creature move more and realized it was just a fawn covered in ashes. So yeah, that's a couple of my stories right there. I thought I'd share a creepy story that happened to my dad and his cousin when they were young. Now, this was about 20 years ago and wasn't really in seclusion, but nonetheless, it is pretty disturbing. When my dad was young, he would sleep over at his cousin's house during the weekends. The house was all one floor, consisting of the front door entrance attached to the living room and kitchen. The living room had a long hallway for the bathroom, his aunt and uncle's room, and then the bedroom where him and his cousin would sleep. His cousin's room was pretty small, with only a bed, dresser, and closet. The bed was pressed against the window, so when they slept, they would face the closet and the doorway. One night at around 3 a.m. or so, my dad recalled seeing shadows emerging from the closet and tried to wake his cousin up without any success. He didn't see or hear anything else afterward, so he fell back asleep eventually. The next night, my dad heard a noise coming from outside the window, just behind the bed. He woke his cousin up successfully this time, and they ran to the bedroom where the aunt and uncle were sleeping. When they went to check, nothing else happened for the remainder of the evening. A couple of weekends later, my dad was over for another sleepover, and here's where it got real scary. At some point in the night, around 1 a.m. or so, my dad once again began to hear something from the closet and saw more shadows moving around. Something he saw that night must have freaked him out more than normal though, because he started screaming, and all of a sudden, a man just sprinted out of the closet, down the hall and out the front door. His cousin woke up, as well as his aunt and uncle. The cops came and did some investigating, but they never ended up finding anything. The assumption was that some creep had been sneaking into the house and hiding in his cousin's closet. The window behind them was an easy lookout for the creep to look in and inspect the area. Overall, it gives me chills whenever they tell me the story. They seem so frightened of it still to this day. Summer of 2004, my family was supposed to vacation somewhere in Maine. My father was stuck in work and meetings though, so he was going to come up from Manhattan a few days after us. My mom wanted to drive up there for whatever reason, super annoying to me at the time, but we didn't really have a choice. My brother, sister, and I loaded into the car, and we started the long drive. I was about 14 at the time. The drive was fairly uneventful, but there were various delays, and we ended up arriving a lot later than originally planned. Because of this, the owners of the house we were renting had already turned in for the night, and we weren't able to get a hold of them to get the keys. Sounds like horrible planning, but apparently they were pretty strict about the time frame to pick them up. My mom decided she wanted some lobster, so we went out to one of our favorite spots. She called my dad to see if he could make us some reservations at a hotel while we ate and enjoyed the lobster. While we were eating, a guy came up and started chatting with my mom. I figured it was just a friendly local, making some conversation. During this, my dad called my mom, and my mom excused herself to speak to him. Apparently, all the hotels were booked for the night. Go figure. The plan was for us to drive to the nearest town now and find anywhere to stay until we could pick up the keys for the vacation home the next day. Apparently, the local had been listening in on my mom's conversation though, and came back over when she got off the phone. I want to say there was nothing outwardly off about him. He was very preppy, clean-cut, and unassuming. He'd fit in perfectly with any other normal person. He told my mom he had a big home with a big guest house, and we were more than welcome to stay. He and his wife wouldn't mind at all. No way were we just going to be staying in some random guy's house in Maine in the dark. No offense to anyone from Maine, but it can get very creepy when it's dark out there. My mom did her due diligence and tried to determine if this guy was legit. He said he was in finance and my mom was an investment banker, so she interrogated him a bit. It was enough for my mom to determine he wasn't totally full of shit. I called my dad myself, hysterical about the prospect of staying with this random guy. He said I was overreacting and that I needed to get out of the city more and accept that sometimes people are just nice. My brother, sister, and I got into our car and followed this guy back to his house. The guest house actually was really nice, fully furnished and everything, but the beds were sort of oddly placed. The guest house had 2 bedrooms, and instead of the beds being located in the middle and centered, imagine a symmetrical room layout where they were each right under the window in each room. It just seemed really weird. Anyway, fast forward. We're all getting ready to go to bed when my mom hears a knock at the door. It's the guy. He said he just wanted to check and make sure we were all settled in. What a nice thing to do. About 30 minutes later, he comes back to check in again. At this point, my mom was like, "Thanks, we're good. We'll stop by the house in the morning to say thank you." Fast forward another 30 to 45 minutes, and I couldn't sleep at all. I was terrified. I kept hearing this weird rustling noise, which was fairly odd because the guest house was nowhere around trees or in close proximity to bushes that might cause such a noise to happen. At this point, I looked over and saw my mom was wide awake too. She was motioning at the window with her eyes. Let me add that none of the windows had curtains at all. The guy said it was because his wife was in the process of redecorating. When I looked up to where my mom was looking, though, I could see a male figure was just standing at the window looking inside. I thought I was going to have a heart attack. I don't know how long he had been there for. When he walked away, my mom waited for a bit, then told us to grab our stuff together. She wasn't messing around. We had my dad on the phone at this point, and he was pretty much flipping out at my mom about something. I didn't hear what they were arguing over, though. Mom said she was going to put the stuff in the car and to follow her out. This was around 2 a.m. or so. When we got into the car, we pulled around to the front of the main house so my mom could return the key and say goodbye. However, when we went to the front, all the lights were off. Not just all the lights, but it almost looked like no one had been home at all. The porch light, the table lamp, and the front windows, everything was pitch black. Also, the 2 cars were gone as well, the local's car and what we presumed to be his wife's car. After seeing this, my mom was pretty unsettled. She said we were leaving right now. We proceeded to drive to the gate at the end of the driveway, only to find it had been dead bolted and locked shut from the inside. It wasn't a super strong gate though, so my dad said we should just ram it. We were in a big SUV after all. We just drove straight through it and right back to New York City, not speaking the entire time. We've never returned to Maine after, and my parents refused to speak about it again. I asked a family member if they knew why my parents refused to talk about it. I asked him when he was drunk so he might be more willing to let some things slip. All he said was they didn't tell us that the actual owners of the house were on vacation. I'm assuming my parents followed up with the local authorities to figure that out, but they never told us. I don't know who that man was or what was planned for that evening. I am curious as to whether there were any known serial killers or murderers in the area at the time, whether traveling or staying there. In 2018, I lived with my partner and my German Shepherd in the Humboldt Park neighborhood of Chicago. I was 33 years old, and our apartment was a 4th-floor walk-up unit. Very typical low-budget Chicago rental in a changing neighborhood. The layout of our building is going to matter in this story. Our building had a total of 12 units. Mine and the 3 below me had a shared front entrance, and the other 8 units were through a different one. All 12 apartments had connected back porches and stairs that shared a walkway to a rear gate, which led out to an open alley. From the front stairwell, there were windows on each landing to the back porches, so you could see the back door of my apartment when standing at the front door through that window. We had pretty good relations with our neighbors, especially those that lived directly below us and shared our front door. And that's the thing that saved all three of us, my partner, my dog, and me. My partner was in a touring band at the time and would leave for weekends or weeks at a time. It was a scary thing for me because I was SA'd and stalked by an ex in my teens and 20s. I was always worried something would tip him off and he'd start coming after me again. A little less than a month before a 2-week tour my partner had scheduled, I received a creepy message on Facebook from that stalker from yet another new account. It was about a week after my car had been broken into. The glove box had been emptied and things were thrown around, but the only thing that had been taken was a bag of dog treats. I even had $20 in the compartment between the seats, and they left the money alone. I was on high alert at this point, and very scared about the time I'd be alone during this tour. My partner was kind of irritated with me and the situation, and felt it was too last minute to cancel, especially over what amounted to a bad feeling and a few isolated things that weren't even direct threats. Truthfully, car break-ins are very, very common in Chicago anyway. It happened to me about 15 times. The police usually do reports over the phone and don't even come to the scene. That's how common it is. What I found the most strange, though, was that the thief didn't take the money. There was a homeless man who had started camping on the boulevard nearby recently, so I didn't think it could have been him. My partner left for his tour, and I set up some cameras and bought door braces for my front and back doors. I became completely nocturnal, unable to sleep at night. My poor dog developed diarrhea around this time. I thought maybe because she was picking up on my stress level. That meant I was taking her down all 4 flights of stairs for her to go 6 or 7 times a night. I began to have the distinct prickly crawling sensation of being watched whenever I would take her out. I couldn't tell where that person was though, or even if it was my own fear and paranoia. Her issues lasted an unusually long time too, almost a week or so. I was going in and out of the main door a lot, feeling very scared. At that point, I noticed that some of my neighbors didn't always pull the door all the way closed, so the lock would engage. I mentioned it to my downstairs neighbor one day, including that I was extra careful because of the stalker. He was supportive and said he'd mention it to everyone else when he saw them. I noticed the door was locked more frequently after that. My partner came home at about 11 a.m. on a Sunday morning. At 8:30 earlier that morning, my first-floor neighbor's place was burglarized. He was a metalhead dude who collected instruments, sold weed and sled and lived all alone. I guess he went out for breakfast and forgot to lock his door while he was gone. Someone had come in, eaten the leftovers in his fridge, took a coat and pair of boots, took his college diploma as well, and left pretty much everything else. They left all the expensive musical instruments and mixing equipment, left the drugs as well. The only other thing they took were a set of keys. The keys were to the first-floor apartment and a master key for the front door and back gate. The neighbors ran into each other right after the break-in, and the second-floor one said to go tell me because I had a stalker. So that's what he did. He let me know what had happened. My partner had just gotten home from his tour when he knocked at the front door. I just about jumped out of my skin. I looked through the peephole and recognized him. The 3 of us stood in the stairs at my front door while he told us about the break-in. We jabber-jawed for a while, about 15 to 20 minutes I'd say. While we were in the middle of talking, we heard the front door open and close below us. We didn't really think that much about it. Then, though, we saw a man climbing up my back porch steps to my back door through the window. There was no other apartment he would have been going to. He had to walk past all 11 more accessible ones on his way to mine. I could see he was not my stalker, and I did not recognize him either, but his image is still burned into my mind. He was wearing flashy black shoes, the ones stolen from downstairs, and had a big black coat, which was oversized and hanging off his shoulders. We locked eyes through the window, and he froze halfway up the stairs to my back porch. He slowly took out a cell phone and called someone as he turned around halfway up the steps. He walked back down the stairs extremely stiffly, like he was pretending to be nonchalant, then bolted into a sprint as soon as he hit the porch below ours. My neighbor ran downstairs and dialed 911. My partner and I ran through the apartment to the back porch and saw a sedan and a windowless van pull out of the sketchy building 2 doors down. Both cars floored it down the alley. We didn't get the plates. The cops said it wouldn't have mattered though. There wasn't any crime committed and nothing concrete to justify stopping them. They very condescendingly explained this to me as they took my statement later. My neighbor is the one who actually made the call and has the police report. My partner and I were just considered witnesses. For a long time though, the thing that scared me the most was a tool my neighbor found when he went running downstairs. It was a 2x4 piece of wood, cut to about 2 feet. The last end of it had been made into a handle of some sorts. It almost looked like a paddle, and for a long time I couldn't figure out what it was supposed to be. Eventually though, we figured out it was a ram for the door. When I looked at my door afterward, it looked like the frame had been broken. It seemed like they used their master key in order to place their ram on my door, then had somebody wait at the back porch to catch me if I tried to run out that way. The other person went to the front entrance since they only had the one key. When we caught them before they could catch us unawares, it seemed they aborted the plan. I suspect they'd been watching me, especially while I was taking out my dog, and figured I was alone. It was pure coincidence my partner arrived home just 30 minutes before all of this. I feel we all could have been horribly injured or worse had we been trapped inside and had they gotten the jump on us. Nothing else ever came of it. My landlord refused to change the locks, but he did agree to let us out of our lease at least. I moved out of Chicago and have added a younger dog I'm training to do some bite work. My house is surrounded by cameras and floodlights now. So, I had a weird experience that I just can't resist sharing. This is a true story. Hopefully, I'll update it if anything new occurs. I live in a historical dorm building in the Northwest, here in the USA, living on the 5th floor of this 100-year-old structure with no elevator, I might add. The building is shaped kind of like a U, and my windows face another dorm room across the way. I've been sleeping like a night owl recently, going to bed around 3 a.m. and waking up at 10 for class. I'd never met my neighbor across the way, never even made eye contact with them really. He was a male and he had heavy curtains he always closed shut at dusk. They would be open when I woke up. Today I woke up really early, awoken by a weird dream I couldn't quite seem to remember. I sat up in my bed. My bed faces the window across. I could see the window of my neighbor directly in front of me. I had some things sitting in my windowsill, so I couldn't see all of their apartment, and they couldn't really see into mine either. My windows were also always fogged up. I liked it that way though, so no one could take a peek inside. At one point, I woke up feeling groggy in the night when I saw movement in the window across the way. I could see my neighbor opening their curtains, so somewhat instinctively I hid. They couldn't see me watching them, but I could see what they were doing. He opened his curtains almost like something from a dramatic movie, both hands splitting them apart down the middle. This is where things got a bit weird though. After he opened the window's curtains, he just kind of stood there like he was frozen. I watched him out of the corner of my window. He wasn't making eye contact, so he didn't seem to know I was there. He was just kind of staring into my room. I sat there as well, and we both stayed like that for 5 minutes. Suddenly, he broke his gaze, turned away, and walked out of my view. I stayed in bed for a while, but I was still very tired. It was about 7 a.m. I was thinking, what just happened? I got up and made some coffee, then sat back down in bed and watched some YouTube videos to get my mind off that weird experience. I chilled out and forgot about that weirdness. At the start of my day officially though, once more light began to pour in, I caught a glimpse of something in my window. I looked up and noticed there were 3 streak marks that had definitely not been there earlier this morning. With my windows being fogged up all the time, probably from the heat inside my room and the humidity outside, I realized that these were the marks of someone's fingers on the window pane. I had been watching my neighbor that morning. They were in the upper corner of the window, so nobody could touch this area easily. I realized that those marks were in the same place my neighbor had been staring at this morning. I pushed the thought out of my mind and went back to finishing my coffee. I couldn't help but look again though after I got up to put my coffee cup away in the kitchen. As I passed by the window, I noticed a new development. There were now streak marks coming from the top of the finger marks on my window and dragging across the entire thing. I immediately called my mom. She freaked out. There must have been an intruder. I reassured her though that no one had been in my room. Not that I had noticed at least. She asked if they were from the outside or inside of my window. I went up and slowly slid my finger across the marks, and as I left another streak behind, I realized they had been made from the inside. She told me to clean my windows and see if it happens again. I did so, and I'll see if it occurs again. I don't really know what's going on here. It seems like maybe my neighbor saw something, or maybe they were in a trance of sorts. I'm not sure. Maybe I'll try and ask them what they saw and why they were staring. All I can say is I think it will be very hard for me to sleep tonight. I went camping with a group of friends on some public land that I knew quite well. I spent a lot of time out there trail riding and camping most weekends for about 3 years or so. We set up camp at a spot we had used a few times. We had partied with other people at this spot on multiple occasions. This trip there were 6 of us there, and 4 of my friends decided to go to a party. This trip there were 6 of us there, and 4 of my friends decided to go to a party we found out about while on the trails earlier in the day. I was tired from digging my Jeep out of a sand washout though, that I'd had no business driving into anyway. I have to admit it did look pretty cool for the 2 minutes until I got really stuck. Anyways, my friend's girlfriend decided to stay back at camp with me, while everyone else left for the party. We watched the fire die down and listened to the animals outside. I won't lie, I did get a bit of a kick out of her being afraid of the coyotes making noise on the other side of the swamp. I assured her it was fine though. They wouldn't really bother with us at all. After a bit, we got into our sleeping bags, but just as I was starting to doze off, she suddenly asked me, "Did you hear that?" I just ignored her and tried to fall asleep. A minute or 2 later though, she sat up and asked me again. I responded that I didn't hear anything and to go to sleep. Then though, not even a minute later, I began to hear what sounded like an ice cream truck slowly driving down the trail we were on. This trail was one way in or out, about 3 miles long and ended in only a clearing. We were camped within 1/4 of a mile of the entrance/exit. We also went to the end of the trail after we ate dinner, and there was not anyone on it then. No one had driven past us either. I didn't hear the noise of the engine, only the creepy ice cream music moving past us. Not to mention the trail was a ruddy mess, so even a vehicle with a reasonably quiet exhaust would be revving high enough to be heard throughout the woods. I didn't tell her this though, because I didn't want to scare her even more. It sure scared the crap out of me though. When she asked if I heard it another time, and I did, I instead suggested we jump in the Jeep and go to the party the other guys were at. Even though I was tired, I slept on a raggedy couch next to a bonfire in a sand pit. Much better in my opinion than being hounded by some creepy ice cream truck in the woods all by ourselves. I often spend weeks alone in the woods by myself. I used to go on group trips about 2 weekends a month. For 10 years or so, I was practically born into camping, and I really love it. Most of my outings are trips to the Ocala National Forest in Florida and other state or national parks. Most of my odd occurrences are with other people and animals. I've stumbled into neo-Eastern rallies or clan gatherings several times, multiple interactions with the odd hunter and their tracking dogs as well. Last year, however, finally opened my eyes to the danger of being alone. I was heading to my usual spot in Ocala, a free primitive campground next to a secondary creek. That was when I noticed a Department of Corrections bus. The officer there stopped me and briefly inquired about my reasons for being there. I asked what was going on because I was going to be camping in the area. He said a body had been discovered by the road and was linked to a case in the area. He and the prisoners were there to search the surrounding area. The case was being built for a local man apparently linked to the murders. I left the scene and went home, rather than camping out there. While I was on the way back, though, I was thinking the entire time about an occurrence that happened last year when I was alone in my tent. I'd heard footsteps outside. Assuming it was a bear, I pulled the slide on my handgun loud enough to be clearly heard. Rather than an animal noise, though, I was startled by a response of the whispered hush of a man's voice, laughing. I thought back on that and realized I'd narrowly avoided becoming a part of that case myself. The man was later caught and arrested and linked to a ton of murders in the area. I think he's still serving time in prison now. This happened to my dad 10 years ago. Nothing too crazy. I was relatively young at the time, so it really creeped me out. We lived in a smallish city in a residential neighborhood, about 20 minutes from downtown. It was summer, and my dad was up late writing, around 3 a.m. or so. As he looked out the window, he could see a man and a woman, anywhere from 25 to 30 years old, walking down the street. They walked right up our driveway and right to our front door, possibly because they saw a light on inside. They knocked loudly on the door. My dad was already suspicious of what these two wanted. He decided not to open the door. Our door had a large glass window on it, and if you spoke loudly enough, you could hear someone on the other side. My dad asked them what they wanted, and they asked to come inside. My dad, of course, refused, but the couple repeatedly asked if he could call them a cab then. My dad said okay to this. As soon as he did, the couple again asked if they could come inside. My dad said no, and told them to wait at the end of the driveway. My dad then turned away from the door and shut all the lights off in the house. He never did get the chance to call a cab though. As he went to the window to watch the couple, they walked back to the end of the driveway, appeared to have a long conversation, and then walked back down the road, out of sight and into the darkness. I can understand someone showing up to ask for a cab if you live near a bar or a restaurant or something, but like I said, we were 20 minutes away from any of that stuff. Our neighborhood was mostly young families, and it was a very safe area. We did have a few incidents of people going to our cars at night if we left them unlocked, but that was it really. I was asleep the whole time this was happening. When my dad recounted the tale in the morning, it definitely spooked me. Afterwards, if I woke up in the middle of the night, I would have a difficult time getting back to sleep. My neighbors ended up having a break-in a few months after this incident, so we decided to get an alarm system for the house. It definitely helps me sleep at night. My mom owns her own business and works extremely hard. This means she spends many late nights sitting on the living room floor with her work sprawled out all around her. One night back in 2003, she had her typical routine going, sorting through paperwork and making piles. It was close to midnight on a Wednesday, so when the phone suddenly rang, she was a bit surprised. My dad worked third shift at a factory, so she assumed it must be him. When she answered the phone, though, there was no reply, just lots of heavy breathing on the other end. Admittedly creeped out, she hung up and called my dad. He told her it was not him that called, and she left it at that. Keep in mind this was almost 15 years ago, and we lived in a small town with practically no crime whatsoever. We never locked our doors, and we were never scared of dangerous people either. After that initial call, though, the phone calls started to come in every night, then multiple times a night. The person on the other end started talking eventually too. He started by saying, "Hello, Diane. You're so beautiful. I'd love to meet you." Things quickly escalated after, with him going into graphic detail of how he wanted to essay and strangle her. Of course, she stopped answering the phone, and she informed the police as well, but nothing was ever done about it. The phone would continue to ring every night onward. My parents weren't in the situation where my dad could stay home from work, and my mom truly believed the calls were just empty threats, so things continued on that way. That was until one night, when he got brave. My mom was sitting on the floor in front of our huge mirrored cabinet, with all of her work spread out around her. When the phone rang this time, she ignored it, as she had started to do. She was concentrating hard on a piece of paper in front of her, when a glimmer of light in the mirror caught her eye. She looked up to see a pair of eyeglasses peering at her in the reflection. She spun around to face the front door, which her back had been turned to. There was a man standing there, just staring at her. She said they both stared at each other for what felt like forever, until she saw the doorknob start to turn. She started screaming, and the man quickly ran away. In light of this happening, my parents started locking all the doors, which was a totally foreign concept to this area. My older brother, who was about 17 at the time, was aware of the phone calls as well. He came running down the stairs with a baseball bat, but the man was already long gone. When the police came, they scoured our property and came across close to 200 cigarette butts right underneath our living room windows. They were all hidden behind the bushes. Apparently, he had been watching her for weeks on end. The police also happened to find a bike tire trail coming from the windows and going down to the sidewalk. The police took the cigarette butts and did DNA testing on them. They were able to match them to a convicted rapist who lived on the street. Robert Hahn was arrested while riding his bike. He went to prison for menacing an attempt to commit a crime. He had many priors, so we assumed he would be locked up for quite some time. The reason I'm telling this story is because he was recently released from prison. I love caving. I absolutely love it. I even joined a caving club. They send you an information packet once a month about featured cave tours. One month, they sent out a packet containing a 7 to 8 hour wild man caving tour. I've been on wild man tours before, and they're not too difficult. Maybe some rappelling or mild climbing. Nothing over an hour though. This one had some real danger. Climb too much to the right and you get stuck. Slip too far and you can fall in a hole. Getting rescued in a deep cave is basically impossible. There were 5 of us, 3 tour guides, me and another person. About halfway through the cave, they let us rest on this shallow ledge thing that was right next to the biggest drop-off of the cave. The guides told us how with larger groups, they did the typical total darkness and had everyone turn off their headlamps and just look around. When he motioned for us to follow suit, we did so. After about 30 seconds in the darkness, though, there was this sound. Honestly, it sounded like footsteps, then falling rocks, and finally a screech of terror. Immediately, the head guide flipped on his headlamp and looked around us with a panicked glint. He thought one of us had fallen or jumped off the edge. He turned to the other 2 guides and asked if they'd heard it as well. They did, but they couldn't explain what it was. They hadn't moved at all, and the 2 of us were still there. He radioed to the surface and asked if any of the other tours were missing anyone. This was about 3 hours away from the start of the Wild Man path, and without our headlamps, it was literally like staring into a wall of black. There was no way an inexperienced or even an experienced caver would have made it that far by themselves. The guides asked us if we wanted to continue with the experience and would understand and refund us if we decided not to. We went along and eventually did complete the tour. Everything else was perfectly normal. I have no idea what that could have been. It certainly wasn't animal footsteps, and that screech was blood-chilling. Me and my friends have camped out at Mount Charleston in Nevada a lot of times before, and walked in the dead of night into the pitch darkness to tell each other scary stories. On this day, though, we weren't camping. We just wanted to enjoy the view and play in the snow a bit. We pulled over on the road. While we were all talking and having fun, though, we heard a growl and some footsteps in a bush nearby. We had heard that mountain lions were all over these roads. I had never seen one personally, but I'd had friends who had. We all got scared, because normally when we were out in the woods, we'd have guns or knives or machetes on us, but this time we didn't have anything. We ran as fast as we could back to our car, hearing whatever this was following behind us. While everyone else was hopping inside, I found out that my door was still locked, so I had to climb in through the window of another door. I even accidentally kicked the cute girl I had a crush on right in the face. She was mad and we were all scared. As we all piled in, we saw a big cat emerge from the brush. Needless to say, we got out of there as fast as we could, and whenever we decided to go in the future, we brought all our equipment with us just in case. I live at the base of a mountain, which is fairly secluded. No humans really go there, except for me and other people from my family. One summer evening, I decided to climb up to the top, which takes about 2 hours. I set off with my 3 dogs. When we got to the Willow maze, which is exactly what it sounds like, basically a field of willows with little trails and very limited vision, the dogs started to act quite weird. While they would usually run ahead on the hike multiple times, this time they stayed right by me and seemed very anxious. Their anxious energy rubbed off on me, and suddenly I felt like there were eyes on me. I could hear rustling in the bushes. And that's when I heard a faint laughter of a man nearby. And that's also when I decided to get the hell out of there as fast as humanly possible. When I got home, I told my dad, and he told me there had been a murder in that area not long ago, but he didn't want to tell me unless he had to, on fear of scaring me from going out ever again. Nowadays, I try to stick to my regular route and avoid that creepy but beautiful Willow maze. It's been about 10 years since this happened, but I still remember things pretty clearly. I should note that this is told from my perspective, and I wish I could get my mother's on it as well. Unfortunately, she doesn't remember the events as well as I do. For context, I live in a mid-sized city in the southern United States, where the main thing to do at the time was to go to the mall. Sure, we had a movie theater and a couple of bowling alleys, but besides that, there wasn't really much to do. My mom worked at a department store located in the mall, and having nothing better to do, I would regularly go and visit and sit in the break room while she worked. It gave me a reason to get out of the house, and if I wanted to, I was allowed to walk around the mall or get something to snack on in the food court. Honestly though, I was fairly shy back then, so I preferred to just stay in the break room and play video games on my 3DS. My mom's coworkers were very sweet to me and frequently popped in to say hello or check in on me during downtime. If I was lucky enough to go with my mom on weekends, I could usually convince my mom to pick up my friend. We were actually dating, but since we were both girls, I didn't want anyone to find out, and she'd come along with us. Going to the mall meant I was free from doing chores at home, and it was a cheap way to sneak in a secret date every now and then. My girlfriend, though, never really liked staying in the break room with me. She always wanted to walk around the mall instead. I should note that she really enjoyed taking walks, so it wasn't out of the ordinary to want to do so at the mall as well. I just didn't like walking as much as she did. I tried to weasel my way out of it whenever I could. I could usually convince her to just walk over to a nearby store and look around or grab something from the food court rather than going all around the area. I noticed pretty quickly, though, that she wasn't really trying to get me to walk around. She actually seemed to just not want to be in the break room. My girlfriend is much more perceptive to things than I was, and I assume she just didn't like the ambiance for some reason. For a little while, I just let it go, but eventually I got frustrated and I asked directly what was really bothering her about this break room. I thought she was going to tell me it was too cramped or the lights randomly cutting off made her uneasy, things that bothered me about it too, but no. She told me that she could hear things in the ceiling, like someone had been walking around up there. I had learned from my mother that there was in fact a room up in the ceiling, but it wasn't for walking around in, it was for maintenance. Most of the stuff in there was wiring and insulation. Technically, someone could go up there. I told my girlfriend this and said it was likely an employee just trying to fix things. She said it was fine, but she didn't really like it and still preferred walking around or sitting in the food court. I understood her discomfort and wanted to help, so I agreed. We had a really good relationship in the sense of communication, and though I did get a bit frustrated, I didn't really mind too much if it made her more comfortable. Later that day, I mentioned what my girlfriend had told me and asked what they were fixing in the ceiling to my mom. My mom looked very distressed though and said they hadn't been fixing anything that day. She wanted me to see something though. She took me into the receiving room of the department store, which was a room off in the back filled with boxes and random junk. The layout of this room though was sort of an L shape. Only one part was used for receiving. The other part was a way up into the ceiling. I should clarify for this next part that to get into the ceiling, the store would have to call for the mall's maintenance team. They didn't have a ladder or anything on hand to climb in there, as it would have been a safety hazard to leave around. The only thing this particular area had was the hatch that led to the ceiling. That was it. Needless to say, I was horrified to see what appeared to be gash marks leading up the wall to the hatch. I still remember the way they looked. Brown gashes that had been dug into the concrete wall of the receiving room. I asked my mom if this was a prank, but she told me that wasn't even the first time it had happened. She had no way of knowing I would even ask about it. According to her, these weird gashes would show up several times over the course of many months. Each time, the store would call the mall security and maintenance teams, who would clean the wall up and go into the ceiling to investigate. They never found anything with their searches though, and they eventually gave up looking altogether. The only explanation they could find was that it was likely a homeless individual who had somehow made their way into the ceiling and somehow avoided everyone during all the searches. I stopped staying at the mall with my mom after that, and anytime I wanted my girlfriend to come over, we found somewhere else to go during the day. I didn't really feel safe going to the break room after that. I know nothing had technically happened up until that point, but I didn't want to risk hanging around with some random person skulking about in the ceiling. This happened back in 2021. I, 27 and female, had just moved from Melbourne to rural Australia to live with my fiancé. At that time, he was still only my boyfriend. He was 29 and was on military posting at the army base. The town we moved to was pretty isolated, about 4 to 5 hours to reach any large city in each direction. It was still big enough though, with a few different suburbs surrounding the main area. Neither of us really knew the area at all before moving, and this led us to get a house in a pretty sketchy part of town. I'll try to explain the setup of the house first, as this will be important later. The house we moved into was quite old. It had huge glass windows everywhere, including the entirety of the front of the house. Because of this, you could easily see into the kitchen, living room, and one of the unused bedrooms without coming down the driveway. There was an old metal fence to the left of the house, which was about 1.5 meters tall. It led directly into the backyard. To the right of the house was a small path, hidden by an overgrowth of bush and plants from the front. With a locked gate the height of the house that led to the back semi-enclosed patio and back door, the path was right next to the kitchen window. You couldn't exactly see out when the light was on, but you could see in if you were outside. When coming in through the back door from the patio, you would walk through the laundry with an adjacent bathroom, into the kitchen with our bedroom off to the left, and a second one directly next to ours. My boyfriend was out doing military stuff for a week, so I had been home alone. It was summer during this time, and it was quite hot. The house had terrible AC, so I had been sleeping with the windows open, and even left the back door wide open on accident when falling asleep a few times. I've always felt safe in Australia, and have lived mostly alone ever since I was 18. I didn't really have an issue with it. It comes to Friday, my 5th day there alone, and I decided to walk into town and find something to do. The walk took about an hour each way, and when I finally got home, I was looking forward to doing nothing besides getting out of this heat. I spent most of the afternoon in the living room, playing PlayStation and watching TV. I had heard a few weird noises though, down the side of the house on the path next to the kitchen, leading to the patio. The guy who lived next to us had a workshop of some kind though, so I assumed it must have just been him tinkering around. I'm one of those people who lay in bed before they're ready to go to sleep. As I laid there, around 10 p.m. or so, I was doing my nightly scroll of Reddit. This really saved my ass, as I read a story that prompted me to get up out of bed and go close and lock the back door, which I'd almost forgotten to do. The back door had a normal lock, then a reinforced deadlock with a key screwed into the wall. 45 minutes or so later, still hearing the neighbor tinkering around occasionally, I decided I was ready to actually go to bed. I go and start turning off all the lights, including the back patio light and kitchen light. I lay down in bed and am finishing up my mindless scrolling when I hear the noises again. This time though, it was much louder. Still, it could just be that the guy was working in his workshop even harder, or maybe some kind of animal rustling things around. I was about to put down my phone and write it off, when suddenly, I heard a loud bang at my back door. I instantly felt like everything was going in slow motion. I just knew someone was kicking the back door in. I thought to myself, this cannot be happening. Then came another bang, and another. It was all so loud, and it felt like the house itself was shaking. I could hear multiple points of glass shattering, and the banging continuing. This went on for what felt like an eternity, but was only a few minutes. In my panic, after the second or third bang, thinking I could scare them off by pretending a man was here, I yelled out in the deepest voice I could, then slammed my bedroom door closed. Obviously, that didn't really work. I locked it and called 000, then pushed my bed up against the door. The banging was still going on, even as I called the police. Just as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. There was nowhere else to hide, so I was crouched down in the corner of the room near my bed. While on the phone with police, I could hear someone starting to kick in the bedroom door as well. I was screaming at this point. I don't even remember what I was saying to the operator, or what they were saying to me. I remember praying the police arrived before these people got inside my room. I could hear sirens. The banging on the bedroom door stopped immediately, and I saw torches shining into the bedroom window. Because I was so scared, I couldn't really comprehend what the operator was saying to me. I had no idea if those torchlights were whoever had just kicked in my back door and bedroom door, or if it was the police finally arriving. I don't remember how I realized this, but it turned out it was the police outside. The next thing I remember, I was in the kitchen surrounded by 10 officers, crying and trying to explain what had happened. I was so inconsolable that the police had to use my boyfriend's army photos on the fridge to get his details to call the duty officer to allow him to come home. Once I calmed down a bit and my boyfriend got back, I saw the back gate to the patio was completely broken. The bedroom door was cracked and the back door had been thrown off its hinges with the deadlock completely ripped out of the wall. The laundry window had been smashed in as well. There were 2 sets of clear footprints on the door from where they had kicked the door in. I checked my phone and called 000 at 12:04 a.m. and had been on the phone for less than 5 minutes. What I think happened is that they must have followed me back from my walk. They could easily see from the road that I was alone and had been watching me on the path next to the kitchen for the evening. The noises I thought were the neighbor tinkering must have been them, and once I turned the lights off, they finally made their move. I don't think they anticipated the back door would be so hard to break down though, which is why they smashed the laundry room window. They couldn't unlock the deadbolt without the key though, so I guess they broke it down somehow. Luckily, that extra time saved me from whatever they were trying to do. The guys weren't ever caught, and we ended up moving house within the next few weeks. My boyfriend and I even ended up breaking up, as he was regularly out on duty, and I couldn't stand to be home at night anymore. I would panic, cry, and not sleep until the sun would come up, and it put too much strain on the relationship. It wasn't until later that I realized I was experiencing PTSD, and after I worked through it, we got back together. I now live back in my home city in an apartment building that has 24/7 security, a billion cameras, and I got 2 dogs as well.